it's important to understand that to really understand the key fundamental financial issues of the district, you don't have to be a CPA. You don't have to have attended a lot of accounting classes. I hear a lot of misguided, extraneous information that gets spoken and discussed. And if you listen to all of that rhetoric, it can be very confusing. It can make you wonder how to think about things. This sheet will really help simplify everything. If you take, almost every time I hear somebody with a comment, concern, I can take almost everything they say, compare it to these 5 areas, and see where it contradicts or it does not go along with the true facts. This sheet will simplify the district finances for you. If you understand this sheet, no matter how confusing or complex other people want to make their comments, this boils it down into the simple truths. So to go over this very quickly, we look at the first section, cash reserves. Common comments from the community are, why do we need so much cash? We're not a bank. Well, bottom line is there's 2 buckets that we look at. There's operating and there's non-operating. In simplistic terms, when you're looking at the non-operating, it's for your capital needs, for projects. It's no different than your home. If you're going to get carpeting or new siding or whatever, you go to the bank, you want a loan. The more cash you have, the better loan you get, the lower interest rate. The less cash you have, the worse interest rate. So by having sufficient cash reserves, we save the taxpayers money on interest expense on the loans for that bond. On the operating side, that's the money that we spend on our daily bills. The way the cash reserve percentages are computed, DESE, the state agency, looks at your June cash. That's the middle of the year. How do we get our money? We get our money when you guys get your real estate tax bill and your personal property tax bill. You get it in November. You pay it in December. That's when we get our money. We get our money in December and January. That's when we have most of our cash. And then every month after, our cash goes down until the following December. DESE measures our cash at June. So if we have a 17% cash reserve in June, by December, we're down to 0. So it sounds like we have more cash than what we really have when you look at the DESE numbers. So whatever our cash reserve percentage is as stated by DESE, subtract 17, and that's how much we have in December. So once again, 17% at June is really pretty much what we need to break even by the end of the year. The state average approximately for cash reserves is 36%. Each school on average has 36% reserves. The county average is around 26%. We're well below that. We're projecting 17% by the end of next year, next fiscal year. That's well below the averages. So it's important to know we don't have too much cash. We need cash to operate. Second section, deficits. Next year, earlier in the year, December, January of this school year, earlier, we were projecting an $8 million operating budget deficit. Deficit means you spend more than you make. With updated trends of state revenues and such, we updated that in the spring to project a $6.6 million deficit. And then we made the $4 million of budget cuts, so that's gotten us to $2.6 million in budget deficits for the operating funds. Once again, there's 2 buckets. When you look at the total budget, you've got operating and you've got non-operating. This is talking about operating. We can talk about capital another time. I can't do that in 5 minutes. So the operating really relates a lot more to the tax levy. So that's why I'm going over that tonight. So where we're at right now is we're going into the school year with a projected $2.6 million operating fund deficit projected for next year, which is only part of the total budget. Section number 3, balancing the deficits. When we make projections through fiscal year 18-19, that's 4 years out, based on our current projections, if we implement the strategic plan, we're looking right now at around a $32.5 million shortfall in cash if we don't change anything with the pattern of revenues and expenses. So to cover that, that's equivalent to really about a 63-cent tax raise on the November ballot if we were going to cover the $32.5 million. It's not saying that that's not what I'm recommending. I'm just saying that's what it would take to cover that shortfall and get us through school year 2018-19. Section number 4, financial trends. A lot of people, how did we get here? You know, we were okay last year and now all of a sudden we've got all these problems. Well, that's not really the case. The financial trends show that, once again, how do we get our money? We get our money largely from taxes, which are related to assessed values. The assessed values in this district for the last 6 years have averaged a decline of 1.33% per year. So that heavily drives our revenues. Our revenues have only increased on average over the last 6 years about 0.75%. Our expenses have increased a little over 2%. 2% increase in expenses are pretty well managed. That's not a high percentage. But when your revenues are only increasing 0.75% every year for 6 years, our revenues have outpaced our expenses have outpaced our revenues. That's how you get into a deficit situation. And finally, on the financial benchmarks, section 5 on that sheet, if you look at our cost per student, which is, you can look that up on DESE if you can navigate their website, which is challenging. But the cost per student on the schools that we benchmark, which are mostly our neighbors, and we picked Wentzville just because of similar size as well, 5 of the 6 districts that we benchmarked spend between 10 to 30% more per student than we spend. And I know that if you looked at every St. Louis County school, we would be near the very bottom, if not the bottom. On the other hand, how does that relate to community wealth? If you look at the property value per student at each of those districts, the community assessed property value per student on 4 of those 6 districts, they have 35 to 55% less value per student than we do. In other words, they don't have as many community assets. They're not as wealthy. So you have 4 of these districts that have less community assets, but yet they spend 10 to 30% more on their students. Finally, on the tax rates of these 6 schools, we have the lowest tax rate. All 6 schools districts have higher tax rates, anywhere from 71 cents to $1.64 more than what we have. So if we were at the very lowest tax rate of those 6 schools, that would be an additional 71 cents, and that would bring in $11.4 million of additional revenue per year. That alone would handle our deficit. In all of St. Louis County, we have the 2nd lowest tax rate in all of St. Louis County. So those are the main highlights. And once again, I remind you that when you sit around and you see articles, you hear people talk, claims of wasteful spending, or all the other things that are commented on, how does that compare to these true fundamental facts? How is there wasteful spending when we're on the bottom of spending on cost per student? How can we not afford additional money if 4 of these 6 districts have less community assets than we do? There's a lot that you can glean just off these 5 simplistic points and not let people take you down extraneous, misguided paths of data. Stick to the true key fundamentals, and it will be very simple for you. Thank you.